Thank you so much for joining me here at the live desk. Right now, we are going beyond the headlines, taking a look at surveillance video that is now here on your screen after a small community newspaper in Kansas made national news over the weekend as offices and homes of the paper, publisher, and reporters of the Marion County Record were raided by the police and county sheriff's personnel. Now, with that being said, I do want to turn things over to an expert. We are speaking to this today. It is not this morning, but this is Janelle. She is an associate professor of journalism at KU. And Janelle, I just want to thank you so much for joining me here at the live desk. It is a pleasure to have you here. I do just want to first start off with the basics. What is the First Amendment and how does it protect journalists, especially today with modern technology?
Well, thanks for having me, Janae. This is quite a thing to come home to. I landed on a plane and was deluged when I turned my phone back on with all sorts of stuff from this goings on. So, I mean, it's exciting, depressing, but exciting. So, in response to your question, so the First Amendment to the Constitution is 45 words that contain 5 rights: assembly, speech, petition, press, and religion. Right? Religion is sort of subdivided. Some people think that the speech and press clauses are almost the same. They're not, but in particular, there are really very few pure journalism speech protections. If you are a living, breathing human, you have a lot of the same rights that a journalist does. But there are some rights that have been recognized either statutorily by law or through the judges in the courts called common law that will offer some additional protections to journalists. And at least one of those laws, so libel, for example, you can libel someone as well as I can, and a journalist can libel someone, but the rules are essentially the same. It's just that most media organizations have deeper pockets. Privacy rights, even though privacy doesn't appear in the Constitution, those rights are accrue to us as citizens, and it's important for us to understand those as well. But in terms of this situation with Marion County, there are two specific things in play here that are more specific to journalists and news media. And one of them is a state law and one of them is a fed law. And if that's where you want to go, I'm all in with that. That's good. It's good stuff.
And you know, I think you bring up a good point. I'm going to pull this video up that we have here from CNN. But you bring up a good point where you said that you were shocked when you landed and you received this news that it happened on Friday. And I think that fits in with a lot of what people are feeling on social media as this is circulating all over social media right now. I do want to give a little bit more background. This all stems from an incident where reporters, for the record, were kicked out of an event hosted by Carrie's Kitchen, owned by Carrie Newell. Now, reporters later discovered that Newell had a suspended driver's license and a DUI as she was trying to obtain a liquor's license for her business. The newspaper insists reporters obtained the information through completely legal channels. Now, I do want to move on and say that the Marion Police Department insists it is doing its job in investigating potential criminal activity, saying in a statement, while the law does protect newsrooms from most searches, that's not the case when journalists themselves have committed a crime. Now, Janelle, I do want to bring you back in and I want to ask you, was a crime committed? And if it was, who committed the crime?
Well, the allegation, I believe, and according to the search warrant, it is identity theft and unlawful use of a computer. Now, unlawful use of a computer is a pretty big, bold area. There are several laws that we don't have time to go into that affect how we use computers. But the identity theft, I think, comes from a public records search that was performed by members of the records staff in an attempt to verify a drunk driving allegation that had come from one of their anonymous sources. They published none of this. So the law that you referred to is the Privacy Protection Act. It's a federal law that came into effect in 1980 after a Supreme Court case having to do with the Stanford Daily student newspaper, where the First Amendment or the Supreme Court said that the Fourth Amendment was fine with reporters or newsrooms being searched. So of course, it's hard. You shouldn't be able to search a newsroom. And the state law I mentioned is the Kansas SHIA law, right? This is in Kansas. Kansas has SHIA law along with 35 or 38 additional other states. Most states have some protections in place to protect reporters' confidential sources. So the search that was done on the newsroom, they have first of all, the information in the database that the reporter searched, which is covered by a law called the believe it's the Driver's Privacy Protection Act, says that it's open for you to look at as long as you don't publish that information or use it for anything other than research. And since it never was published, it was simply to confirm allegations that a confidential source had made. There doesn't seem to me to be any crime committed. And in any event, for a warrant, for criminal stuff, you need probable cause. And I just don't see it here. I mean, I don't see it here. I think it was somebody was angry and felt offended by news coverage or by someone at the newspaper and sick the full extent of the law on them. And the judge and the police chief got rolled into that. So I think it's specious. I think they'll settle it. I think it's from the free speech standpoint, from the legal standpoint, it's a pretty good case. If I were taking cases, I would certainly litigate it. I know a lot of people went for it because it is an obvious case with good facts for the newsroom, right? So a couple of people have asked me, my students, I had an email from a student this morning, a former student saying, can they bring charges against them for the death of mom, right? And that's a stretch. I'm not going there. There might be a wrongful death thing, but that certainly isn't covered by any of the freedom of speech or press laws of which I'm aware. They can't, all of this stuff is civil, which is all about money, right? It's all about the mighty dollar.
Yeah, and you do bring up a good point for our viewers who do not know. And I know Angie Racono, our very own Angie Racono, she is following this story. But the mother actually passed away due to stress following that raid.
She did.
So that is definitely just another piece of this story that makes it even more interesting.
Yeah.
Now, how do you
worse.
think that the newspaper company can move forward?
I know they have retained counsel. So they have retained a Kansas City firm. And I believe the Star, it might have been the Star, published the letter that they sent to the police chief, essentially saying, you made these choices to treat these people, and I'm trying to remember the actual quote, to treat these people like they're drug runners or common criminals in breaking into their newsroom. And we're going to give you the chance to work with us to mitigate those damages, although you are going to pay for this. Nothing brings mom back, but there should be repercussions for this egregious, obvious infringement of the law. So the court was pretty clear that it was okay, and Congress then stepped in 1980 to say, this is not okay. We don't want our newsrooms being searched. And if you have to search a newsroom, you can do so under limited circumstances, one of which is a crime being committed, one of which is suspicion that evidence is going to be destroyed. A few other small things come in there. But also importantly, and something that I wish would get more coverage, is the fact that this is a warrant that was offered to a warrant was given without an affidavit, which I haven't seen yet. At least I haven't seen it this morning. But the Privacy Protection Act, the federal law, requires a subpoena, and that's an important distinction. A subpoena is appealable. So you have time to say, hey, look, this is not going to be okay. This is not kosher. In other words, this is something that we need to think about and appeal. A warrant is there for a good reason, right? You don't want the bad guy running off if he has notice, or she or they have notice that a cop is coming. But you do, in this case, have additional protections built in through privacy protection that should enable the appeal of a search like this under privacy protection and under the Kansas Shield law. So I don't think that the due process elements that are president subpoenas were followed in this case. And that's troubling. That's troubling. I have to wonder how many more of these happen that we don't hear about. Just sad.
That's a good point. How many more stories like this, like you mentioned, that we don't hear about, that just kind of roll over? And it looks like a lot of steps were missed in this, but it is all under investigation. Have we ever seen anything like this, or have you ever seen anything like this? For those who are just now joining us, this is Janelle Bell-Mass, and she is an associate professor of journalism at KU. So throughout your career, have you ever seen a situation like this?
Not as egregious as this. I mean, there have been allegations of newsrooms being looked into. I've taught this case, the Stanford Daily case, that resulted in the Privacy Protection Act and the Privacy Protection Act for, okay, I'm going to date myself here, for decades since I started teaching this. And I always taught it because I always thought it was important. It's not one of the big things that we tend to teach in media law. We teach libel and intellectual property and privacy and access to courts and a few other things. But Privacy Protection Act is always something I kept in because I thought, well, it could happen someday. I'll never see it until I saw it. So it's horrifying to me that in this day and age, we should be seeing these sorts of, I mean, Eric Meyer put it well. He said this is a Gestapo type raid, and I don't think he's wrong. I think that this is awful, that it is a clear abridgment of both privacy protection and the Kansas Shield law. And I think that there's going to be repercussions. And, if there's a concern about keeping information private, I mean, the Streisand effect, everybody knows who Carrie Newell is now, right? Everybody knows the allegations against her. If she just been quiet, and again, the paper published nothing. If she just kept quiet, none of this would ever have come out. So there's something sort of a supreme divine justice about her calling in the troops on this and then ending up having to suffer the consequences of everybody knowing her business. And, admittedly, journalists are there. When I teach my kids at KU, we talk about, what is it, comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. So we know that the from other news that's come out since that the record was investigating the police chief and was really doing what journalists, committing acts of journalism, right? Doing what journalists are supposed to do, looking into people in power and asking hard questions. And my suspicion is that when this came up, the police chief was all too ready to say, let's put the screws to the record, because they're annoying to me too. So I'm not alleging that, there was any of that discussion back there. I don't know. But, I've seen that there has been some support for the police as well in Marion. So it could be also that, there's some people who want to see the record go down in flames. I don't think that's likely. I think they'll settle before it gets to court. But anything can happen.
Right.
Anything can happen.
And again, we are keeping our eyes on this story as well as so many other stories right now. But, also you are teaching aspiring journalists right now as a professor at KU. And what do you think this means for news journalists moving forward as well as news agencies? How do you think they will go about stories differently, if at all?
I would like to hope this doesn't chill. So in the law, we talk about a chilling effect, right? In other words, you see something like this go on and then you get nervous, right? You don't want your phone seized. You don't want your newsroom broken into. There's not to say that there isn't room for happy journalism, right? Or for public relations and advertising. That's an important part of our society. And I'm not denigrating that. But for journalism, there's a reason it's called the fourth estate, and we still call it that, right? It is my kids and my job when I was a journalist to hold the feet to the fire, to literally comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable, to literally go in and find out stuff that people are trying to keep hidden that affects the common good, right? Or helps to help people to get information to make intelligent votes, to be good civic citizens. All right. So to me, in media law, the big things are to be sure that you recognize both your rights and your responsibilities, right? So you have rights. Shield law gives rights, Privacy Protection Act gives rights. There's some other laws that give rights, but there's also responsibilities. And in this case, I think the was doing it all, the record, sorry, was doing it all right. In other words, they were doing the hard work of looking into allegations of wrongdoing, and to see them suffer for this is problematic. I'm going to clarion call to my students this fall. This is the reason we do this stuff. We do this to be sure that people are keeping on the up and up to the best of our ability, right? It is our job to hold government's feet to the fire, right? The first word of the First Amendment is Congress. Congress shall make no law, right? So we know that most of the issues in this area right now are having to do with the government. So there are other, of course, laws out there that have to do with private individuals and their gatekeeping abilities. I don't need to go into X and all those other social media apps out there, but there's separate law for that as well. And I think as the amount of media law grows, the harder it is to keep on top of it. I think I teach the best stuff in the world. I mean, I'm biased, admittedly, but I think it's critical. I am so proud to teach baby journalists. I'm so proud because they're going to be doing the important work of making sure that we have all the information we need to be a part of a powerful and supportive self-governing democracy. To me, that's where it's at. And to see this happen makes my blood pressure go up, makes me cry, makes me throw things. It's crazy because You're like, how dare they? How dare they come after these people? And the answer is, well, they dared. And now there are repercussions.
And I think that this is going to be an important and very timely discussion as we go into the new school year for you and your students. So again, I appreciate you taking the time to sit down
Absolutely.
and talk to me. And we'll have to have you back on so we can do a follow-up
Would love
regarding
that.
this story as it is still under investigation. Again, I want to take a
Absolutely.
look at the surveillance video as we look ahead to our later evening newscast. Like I mentioned, our very own Angie Racono is following this story, as well as Grace Smith. So be sure to tune into our newscast coming up in just a few hours.